In the early 1990s, a terrible war tore apart the country of Bosnia and Herzegovina. During this conflict, many people were forced from their homes. One town, Srebrenica, became a place of refuge for thousands of Bosniak Muslims who were fleeing the violence. The United Nations, an organization that works for global peace, declared Srebrenica a safe area in 1993. This was meant to protect the people living there from the fighting. UN peacekeepers, soldiers from the Netherlands, were sent to the town to ensure its safety. For a time it seemed like Srebrenica was a small island of security in a sea of war, offering hope to those who had lost everything else. The promise of safety, however, was fragile and ultimately broken. The town was surrounded by the Bosnian Serb army, which was led by General Ratko Mladic. The people inside Srebrenica had very little food, medicine or supplies. The small group of Dutch UN soldiers had only light weapons and were not prepared for a major attack. They were tasked with protecting tens of thousands of desperate civilians, an impossible mission without stronger support. The international community watched as the situation grew more dangerous, but no significant action was taken to reinforce the town or push back the surrounding army, leaving its inhabitants vulnerable. On July 11, 1995, the Bosnian Serb forces began their final assault and easily overran the town. The UN peacekeepers were overwhelmed and could not stop the advance. Panic spread through Srebrenica as thousands of terrified civilians fled their homes, seeking shelter at the main UN base in a nearby village called Potachari. They believed the United Nations flag would protect them from the soldiers entering their town. Mothers held their children tight, and families huddled together, hoping that the international presence would be enough to save them from the approaching forces, who now controlled every street and building. The capture of Srebrenica marked the beginning of a meticulously planned and brutal operation. The Bosnian Serb soldiers, under the direct command of General Mladic, took complete control of the area. They immediately began to separate the population. The Dutch peacekeepers, having surrendered the town, were powerless to intervene as the soldiers systematically divided families. This separation was the first step in a horrific plan of ethnic cleansing. The world would soon learn that the fall of this UN-safe area was not just a military failure, but the prelude to the worst mass murder in Europe since World War II. Once the Bosnian Serb forces controlled Potachari, they began a cruel and systematic process. They separated the men and older boys from the women, children, and elderly. Families were torn apart in scenes of chaos and terror. Mothers pleaded to keep their sons, but soldiers forced them apart. Many of these men and boys were told they would be questioned and later reunited with their families, a false promise to prevent resistance. They were gathered into empty buildings, schools, and warehouses. This organized separation was not random. It was a deliberate act designed to eliminate the future of the Bosniak community in Srebrenica by targeting its male population. Over the next several days, a monstrous crime unfolded. More than 8,000 Bosniak men and boys were systematically executed. They were taken by bus and truck to various locations in the surrounding countryside, such as fields, schools, and abandoned factories. There they were lined up and shot by firing squads. The killings were methodical and carried out with brutal efficiency. To hide this atrocity, the perpetrators used bulldozers to bury the victims in large mass graves. It was a cold, calculated effort to erase thousands of lives from existence and conceal the evidence of the massacre from the outside world. While the men and boys were being murdered, the remaining population of over 20,000 women, children, and elderly people were forcibly expelled. They were packed onto overcrowded buses and trucks and driven out of the Srebrenica area. This act is known as ethnic cleansing, a practice intended to remove an entire ethnic group from a territory. The conditions on the buses were terrible, with no food or water, and many suffered abuse during the journey. They were dropped off in territory controlled by the Bosnian army, arriving with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the trauma of what they had witnessed and endured. In an attempt to permanently hide the genocide, the perpetrators later undertook a massive cover-up operation. Months after the initial killings, they dug up the primary mass graves with heavy machinery. The bodies were then moved and reburied in dozens of smaller, secondary, and even tertiary graves scattered across a wide area of eastern Bosnia. This gruesome process dismembered the bodies, making it incredibly difficult for families to find and identify their loved ones. For decades, forensic experts have worked to piece together remains from these scattered graves, a painful task that continues to this day. The world was horrified when the truth about Srebrenica emerged. In response, international courts were tasked with bringing the responsible individuals to justice. The International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, located in The Hague, began a long and difficult investigation. The court's primary goal was to hold individuals accountable for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. Prosecutors gathered thousands of witness testimonies, forensic evidence from mass graves, and military documents. This legal process was essential to establish an official, factual record of what had happened and to fight against any attempts to deny the crimes. Through years of trials, both the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia and the International Court of Justice officially ruled that the massacre of Bosniak men and boys at Srebrenica constituted genocide. Genocide is the most severe crime under international law, defined as the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. The courts determined that the systematic killing of Srebrenica's men was specifically designed to destroy the Bosniak community in that area. This legal classification was a landmark moment, confirming that the atrocity was not just a byproduct of war, but a deliberate act of annihilation. The legal process resulted in the conviction of many of the key figures responsible for the genocide. The two most senior leaders, Bosnian Serb political leader Radovan Karadzic and military commander General Ratko Mladic, were eventually captured after years in hiding. They were both tried by the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia and sentenced to life in prison for genocide and other crimes. In total, the tribunal sentenced dozens of high-ranking officers and soldiers for their roles in the massacre. While the state of Serbia was not found directly responsible for committing genocide, the International Court of Justice ruled that it had failed in its international duty to prevent it from happening. The pursuit of justice is not only about punishing perpetrators, it is also about providing a measure of truth for the survivors and the families of the victims. The court verdicts created an undeniable historical record, making it much harder for anyone to revise history or deny that the genocide occurred. Although no sentence can bring back the lives that were lost, the legal process confirmed the suffering of the victims and held powerful men accountable for their actions. This showed that even the most senior leaders can be brought to justice, setting an important precedent for international law and human rights. Today, the memory of Srebrenica serves as a powerful and painful reminder of the consequences of hatred and the failure of the world to protect vulnerable people. The genocide has left deep, lasting scars on Bosnian society, especially for the families of the victims. Mothers, wives, and sisters continue to search for the remains of their loved ones. Every year on July 11th, thousands of people gather at the Srebrenica Potocari Memorial and Cemetery. During this solemn ceremony, newly identified victims are finally laid to rest, a process that brings both closure and renewed grief. This annual commemoration ensures that the 8,372 victims are never forgotten. The Srebrenica genocide had a profound impact on how the world thinks about international intervention and civilian protection. The failure of the UN safe area exposed the weaknesses of peacekeeping missions that lack a strong mandate and the necessary resources to enforce it. It led to a global debate about the responsibility to protect. a principle that suggests the international community has a duty to intervene to stop mass atrocities when a state is unwilling or unable to protect its own people. Srebrenica became a symbol of what can happen when international promises are broken and civilians are abandoned in their moment of greatest need. Despite the established facts and court rulings, the legacy of Srebrenica is still contested. The denial of the genocide remains a serious problem, particularly in Serbia and the Serb-controlled part of Bosnia. Some political leaders continue to downplay the crimes or call the victims and perpetrators of the war morally equal, which deeply hurts survivors and hinders reconciliation. In 2024, the United Nations General Assembly officially designated July 11th as the International Day of Reflection and Commemoration of the 1995 genocide in Srebrenica. This resolution aims to combat denial and promote education about the genocide for future generations worldwide. Remembering Srebrenica is not just about honoring the past, it is about safeguarding the future. The lessons learned from this tragedy are crucial for preventing similar atrocities from happening again. It teaches us about the dangers of unchecked nationalism, the importance of fighting against hate speech, and the moral obligation to stand up for human rights everywhere. The white headstones in the Potocari cemetery stand as a silent testament to a horrific failure, urging the world to remain vigilant and to act decisively to protect civilians in conflict. Forgetting Srebrenica would be to dishonor its victims and to ignore a vital warning for all of humanity.